Tonight, a WUSA 9 investigation into the charter flights you may never see but are helping pay for. For months, our investigative unit has watched shackled men and women being loaded onto planes at local airports. It is part of a government operation that could cost taxpayers up to $1.5 billion. Critics say it is not only violating detainees' rights, but burning through public money to move people across the country on a system even federal judges say is getting it wrong. The Trump administration tells WUSA 9 ICE Air is a necessary tool, describing it as a network that facilitates the movement and removal of people in the country illegally. But every flight has a cost. Tonight, Chief Investigative Reporter Eric Flack investigates the true cost of ICE Air.
It was not your typical flight boarding process at BWI Airport on this day back in February. WUSA 9's cameras rolled as ICE detainees shackled at the wrists and waists, loaded one by one, single file onto planes. This is what's known as ICE Air.
He locked me up, this guy, from my hands, right, for my waist right here, my legs.
Fabel Lemus ended up on one of those ICE Air flights in February. He describes himself as a family man, 28 years in Maryland, owns his own home remodeling business, has 5 kids. ICE calls him a, quote, criminal illegal alien, citing prior convictions for immigration fraud in 1994 and a DUI in 2012. What both sides agree on is that Lemus had been living here for years under a formal ICE arrangement, allowing him to remain in the country with regular check-ins. That is, until this past February, when he showed up for one of those check-ins and was arrested, shackled, and put on an ICE Air flight to Louisiana.
You know, a big change right here in your waist, and then your foot and your hand. Okay, how are you going to walk?
Lemus says he did the best he could to walk alongside about a dozen other detainees. Once on board and in the air, Lemus said an officer handed him food tightly sealed in a plastic bag, but he couldn't open it with chained hands, a huge problem for Lemus, a diabetic who needed to eat before taking his medication.
And I say, look, I'm not an animal.
You said I'm not an animal.
Yeah, I told him, look, I'm an animal. Why you give me food and I can't eat? He said he don't care.
WUSA 9 tracked ICE flights in and out of BWI Airport for months, along with our Tegna affiliates, tracking similar flights in their cities, including Minneapolis, El Paso, and Denver. On any given day, radar can show more than a dozen ICE Air flights in the air at any one time, and data compiled by WUSA 9 and our Tegna partners reveals immigration enforcement flights from BWI have skyrocketed during the first year of Donald Trump's second term, from a single detainee flight last February to 18 last month. The loading of detainees onto these ICE chartered flights here at BWI Airport is a deliberate one, but we noticed something else. The transfer can go both ways. Watch as these two detainees step off that ICE Air flight that had just landed at BWI, then loaded onto a transport bus heading to another ICE holding center. The advocacy group Human Rights First calls those shuffle flights, domestic transfers, moving detainees back and forth between ICE's 25 enforcement and removal operation facilities across the country.
I think they're aiming to deport people in such a cruel manner that people are being treated like Amazon packages, kind of just shuffled about.
Human Rights First says the number of those flights has more than tripled in the past year.
We've also tracked that some of the long distance deportation flights go up to 40 hours. And so to be shackled in 3 places for 40 hours, is extremely excruciating.
ICE defends the use of restraints, calling them long-standing standard protocol and an essential safety measure in line with established legal standards. Our investigation found it is all part of a system that keeps growing, and so does the bill. Government data shows the Trump administration has agreed to pay at least $673 million to just one company, CSI Aviation, for chartered flight services. And the contract could allow that number to climb as high as $1.5 billion.
Let's put the human rights and treatment question aside. Is this system simply inefficient and a waste of money?
The amount of money that is being spent on these transfer flights to move people around the country is extremely high. And what we are seeing now with the use of detention for people who don't need to be detained at all.
The American Immigration Lawyers Association says the system isn't just expensive. It can be a breaking point for immigrants who say they have legitimate claims to remain in the U.S.
If you're stuck in a Texas detention facility after having been shackled for hours, put into airplanes, put into vans without knowing where you're going, unable to contact your family or your lawyer, what are you going to do? So these people are likely to give up their claims quickly, even if they're entitled to legal relief.
So by the time we are in Louisiana and the place in jail, I think it was like 12 hours like that.
How were you feeling physically at that point?
I was thinking, I say, well, if I gotta die, I gotta die. I want to die.
Lemus held on for 18 days in that Louisiana detention center until a federal judge ruled his arrest was unlawful and ordered his immediate release. An ordeal that cost Lemus more than 2 weeks of his life and an ICE Air flight system soaring towards a $1.5 billion bill for taxpayers.
In its statement, the Department of Homeland Security told us despite a historic number of injunctions, DHS is working rapidly and overtime to remove these aliens from detention centers to their final destination, home. When we asked about the future of the ICE Air program, DHS told us for operational security purposes, it does not discuss ongoing or future operations. At BWI Airport, Eric Flack, WUSA 9.